Welcome to the Not Sorry Art podcast. I'm Sari, the artist and creator behind Not Sorry Art. I'm so excited to talk art and creativity with you, so grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's dive in. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Not Sorry Art podcast. I'm Sari. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited for y'all to hear my conversation with artist and teacher Erika Lamar of Flynn Craft House. Erika is a full-time artist and a high school art teacher working in Laredo, Texas. Y'all, I followed her for such a long time. I think she was one of my first follows back when I started my Instagram, getting close to 10 years ago, which is crazy to think about. All the while, she's been a huge inspiration for me as an artist and a small business owner who balances that work with my teaching responsibilities. It's impossible to see Erika's work without instantly smiling as she brings her own colorful twist to foods, flora, and plenty of other familiar items. And like the great teacher she is, Erika provides artist resources such as color workbooks and interactive drawing challenges that she hosts on her YouTube page. In today's episode, we talk about all of her different roles as a teacher and an educator and an overall inspiring person to follow. You can find all of her links to all of Erika's socials as well as her YouTube channel in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I also wanted to say that today's episode is sponsored by my book. I have a book coming out. I'm so proud of this, guys. The links are already up. I'll have them in the show notes. But the book is called Modern Still Life, From Fruit Bowls to Disco Balls. It is my take on a step-by-step painting book. I am really excited about it. Not only does it have like motivational tips and tricks to keep you going in your practice, but it also has clear and beautiful and full color breakdowns of the step-by-step process in my paintings. So I could not be more excited about it. If you wanted to check it out, pre-order it. It would help me more than you even know. Welcome so much, Erika. I can't wait to talk with you today. Thank you for joining me on my podcast. I am so excited to introduce my audience to you. I have followed you for a long time, like maybe even approaching a decade. Is that possible? It's very, very long time. You have been a treasure to watch, and you've always been a rock star personality, very kind, very sharing with your information, but it's been really fun to see you grow and I think the best part is seeing other people gravitate towards you has been really satisfying to watch. So with that, thank you for being here. I'm so excited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here too. I also am such a fan of you. You know, we met a long time ago and I followed your work for a really long time. So I'm super excited.
Yay. Okay. I want to hop right in. I always like starting out with this question, but how did you get into art? And everyone's answer is always so different. Some people start like in college with their interest in art. Some people like popped out of the womb with a paintbrush. I'm just curious, like when did you start seeing yourself as an artist? When did you start getting into art? And how did that lead you to where you are now?
So I have always been an artist since I was a child, and I was always kind of like my parents, love them, super supportive. My siblings and like my friends were always really supportive. I was always that kid that was the artist, you know?
Yeah.
And I've always felt like really pushed into art. And so by the time I got to college, I kind of like floundered around and tried different majors. And then I eventually made my way back to art and ended up like studying art in college. And I feel like that is when I really kind of maybe took on that persona or like that idea of being an artist. And I felt more situated and comfortable in it. So I would say probably around college age.
I love that. Yeah. And I'm really grateful that you pointed out the distinction between like, I feel like so many people are artsy or they get labeled like maybe like an artist in grade school. But then, that moment when you're like, okay, I'm going to call myself an artist, like it's not a big formal moment, but it is a moment, and I always want to like, my big thing is like more people are artists than they think they are, but it's not a title that's handed out. You kind of have to take it on for yourself. If I could just tease into that a little bit, like what helped you, like, do you remember the moment that you were like, you know what? I am an artist. I've been doing art, like I'm artsy. Like, do you remember that?
I probably would have to say, which is now it's funny because I feel like now I have to kind of backtrack and say, like, probably it might have been like when I was in middle school or high school, because I do remember I have a very clear memory, a core memory, if you will, of like going, I don't know if somebody gave me like a gift card or something for my birthday. And I went to Michael's, I think, and
Love
I
it.
bought an easel. And I felt like that was like a really defining moment for me. I proceeded to make a bunch of trash on that easel. Of
I
course,
love
all
it.
the
Yeah.
paintings were horrible. I remember them, but it was a really defining moment, I think, because I acknowledged it and
Mm.
I like invested in myself in that case and invested in this like idea that I was an artist. And it's kind of like when you start to invest, it becomes more tangible.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. That's probably it, because that's the memory I remember when you asked me that question, which I
Yeah.
haven't thought about for years.
Oh, I'm glad we could bring it back to the forefront. And I love that you said it as like an aside, but you were like, and the art wasn't that good, but I still and I think that's such an important distinction because I think from the outside, a lot of people think that the thing that makes them an artist is like one day they'll make a piece of art that's so good, the like skies will open up, a little halo will fall down, and it'll say like you're an artist and you'll be like ordained or I don't know, I'm getting dramatic. But in reality, I know, just like what you said, it's more that you're just like, you know what, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna, I got this easel. It's taking up a corner of my room. Like I'm here, I'm committed. And even when you said that, like I mean, I'm sure the work was better than you're giving it credit. And I am a big believer that any work that moves you forward is important artwork. But I love that you said, and the work wasn't that great, but that's not what matters because I think that that's such a good lesson for artists, honestly, at every stage to hear.
Absolutely. And I live by that right now. I live by that forever. And I think that I try to teach that also. I think that that's such an important thing. And as a teacher, I get a very unique perspective on that, I think.
Yes, and I'm glad you
I don't
brought
know
that
if I
up because
wouldn't dig in there yet, but
yeah. I love that you brought up teaching because that is another hat that you wear is that you're also a teacher. So I'm wondering, like, did that have a moment where you were like, you know what, I want to teach? And I asked that not because I'm just copy and pasting the question, but because I had a moment when I remember, and I don't teach in a formal way in the way you do. You teach high schoolers, but I remember on social media, people would ask me, oh, I can never paint like that. And so I started the carousel feature was a new feature on Instagram like a
Mhm.
while ago.
Yeah.
And I would take a picture of my painting and all the steps and all the process. The drawing's always really fun. The blocking's always fun, but then several slides where it's like, I don't know what's happening here. And then it resolves. And people were like, oh, I get it now. I know how I can do that. And to me, that felt like the best compliment. Like, I love when people like my artwork. I mean, I'm an artist, of course, I love that. But I realized I love even more when someone can look at my work and then they go paint. And I was like, maybe there's something to this teaching thing. Anyways, but I'm curious for you, did you have a moment like that? And how did you find yourself self gravitating towards teaching?
So, I mean, I came to teaching as a matter of necessity, which
Mm,
is, I'm sure, not the like romantic story. Although when I think back on it, like I have been a teacher since I was a child. Like I'm a second oldest. I'm almost an oldest child. I feel like I'm just a teacher in that sense.
mhm.
I had to teach as an oldest child, but I remember like always wanting to play teaching when I was little, and like now I remember going to buy like grade books and I was like, now
Yeah.
I don't even ever want to see a grade book. I hate grading. Like it's the worst thing.
Yeah,
But
I never want to see them.
yeah, no, it's terrible. But as a child, I romanticized. It was a very like, I mean, I had great teachers and I think that's why. And I came to teaching after college when I got pregnant. I had my child. And then I was like, well, I really need a job and I need a real job and I can't just be floating around and being selfish and thinking only about me. So
Mhm.
my mom really kind of pushed me into it. She's like, hey, just they're hiring. Do you want to come and try? I
Nice.
was like, I guess. And so I reluctantly applied and then I got a job. So that was kind of how I got in there. And it was challenging for me, so much so that for several years, wanted to leave. I was like, this is
Yeah.
not what I'm going to do. I can't do this. I'm just, killing time for now. It was so hard. It was so
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
And but I do think that, I had a natural inclination for it and I had a necessity for it. And then I also had amazing teachers all through my school. Like I know some people have stories where, that there can be a teacher that really, shifts the way you feel about yourself and your path. And I know that some people don't always have great stories about that, which is really hard to
Yeah.
hear. But I had great teachers, and I have one of my teachers, my art teacher in high school, who I still keep in touch with.
Oh, I love that.
And she's like amazing. And she really, like, she was also my mentor when I started teaching. She was still
Yeah.
there. She taught me. And so I just feel like that really helped me in so many ways. But having a great role model, and then, I didn't find the traditional path. I did an alternative certification, but all of that I think was, the way my life was supposed to, move in that direction. And I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah, and I love that. It's a beautiful story and how it came together. And I think it is important to show that it's not, a path in any career is not always romantic. I mean, artists a lot of times get romanticized and it's a lot of hustling. It's a lot of,
Mhm.
you know,
So much.
compromising. You don't want to always do that kind of art, and commissions are not always your favorite. But, if you love aspects of it, if there's certain parts of it that like light you up, and it sounds like with teaching, that would have been, the gift that your teachers gave you of like seeing yourself in a new light through someone else's eyes and giving you these skills where you all of a sudden you can communicate what you struggled to communicate in writing, and whatever it looks like for people, and I think that that's an important thing to bring up. And I don't want to dive into sort of the hard part of teaching first, but I do think it's important to talk about like what are the challenges of being an art teacher. If I can assume a little bit, I know you mentioned kind of at the end of your last response that people have good and bad experiences, especially with art teachers. I feel like maybe that's just because that's the part of the world I live in. But when I teach people, kind of as like continuing online or like in workshops, a lot of times some of the students who act really timid will eventually, provide for me some insight that they had a teacher in like fifth grade or middle school or high school who said something to them that they carry with them as if they had heard it yesterday. And, as much as you can have teachers who are transformative, it's such a, even if all those teachers meant well, it's such a hard thing to carry. I'm curious how you navigate that and all of the like more challenging parts of being a teacher.
Yeah, that's such a good question because I question myself every single day. And
Yeah.
just for context, like we had a critique today in my class and I teach advanced students. So the expectation is that they are like at a college level. And so I want them to get a rigorous critique. I don't want it to be gentle necessarily because I want them to learn from it. I want them to make changes and to, develop. But I think about that and I think about like, is this going to land correctly? Is this going to land in the way that I want it to? And it's a very slippery slope and it's a very like, kind of like turbulent kind of way or turbulent like landscape to try
Yeah.
to navigate because it's always trying to make sure that because you never know. Like you said, the intentions could always be good and this could be in everything and it just doesn't land correct. And then it could forever be transformative. It could transform you in a way that you hoped would never have happened. And so I think about that often. It's very challenging. I don't know the right way to do it. I'm
Yeah.
just constantly always trying to be the kind of teacher who can acknowledge when I make mistakes. I mean, I know that a lot of teachers don't do this, but I'll be the
Yeah.
first one to be like, I'm sorry. That was me. I did this wrong. And I want you to know that this is what I intended and this is what I meant. And I want to move forward in a way that's positive and always constructive. And
Yeah.
so it's a lot of acknowledging that they are human and these young children, they're older children, but they're children and they need like holding still like a parent, but also they need to have like that kind of firmness where it helps them. So it is a hard and a slippery slope. And I wish I could say like, this is the way to do it, but I don't know. Every day I'm
Yeah.
like, hopefully this is going to be the right way. And if I do it wrong, I own it and I tell
Yeah.
them like, sorry, I did this wrong, or I didn't want you to think of it like that. And
Yeah.
we talk a lot. I talk a lot to my students and I have really good relationships in most cases with all of them. And so that I think is really important. Like they need to know who I am too, so that they don't think I'm meant to like beat them up. I'm there
Right.
to like
Right.
help them grow.
Yeah, and create good context. I mean, the way you answered that was so like how do I know? But I think it sounds like, your willingness to be like, hey, I don't know everything. I don't, that's probably a good sign that you're a fantastic teacher. But I love what you said, it reminds me that, I think this is something you do well because you also have a social media platform where you share and give generously with your time and your education, and you have like a sketchbook series. And the message that I always get when I look at even just like how you show up is the context you create around it is very like forgiving. Like the fact that even you do a journal where it's not quite so formal, like it's not a, finished painting. I think even there's message in the medium, right? Where
Yes.
you're showing up, you're a little bit every day, you're timing it out so you're not putting the focus on like a finished product, but rather time spent creating. And I think that that's, if you create that, if you have any kind of that vibe in your classroom, like I know that your classroom is probably fantastic, but that reminds me, you also said like discipline and like that structure with it too. And I see that in how you show up on social media. Is that like a big philosophy for you? And like, how did you get to where that is something that you care so much about?
Yeah. I'm super glad you asked that. And I'm so glad that you said that because I always ask myself, I have major imposter syndrome, and I'm constantly asking myself if what I'm trying to deliver is reading, is everybody seeing what I'm trying to put forward? And I do think that, I came to this kind of like way of thinking based on my own like necessity, or like this tendency I have towards perfectionism. And I've always been like that. And I've had like, a huge struggle with that as a child. I remember like having paper and like throwing it away until I got it right, and then throwing it away. And I would have a pile of paper
Yeah.
and I just couldn't let it be. And so I always tell my students, even like I was that kid who couldn't finish a work. I was
Mhm.
that kid that my teacher would separate me because I was chatting or I was delaying and I was stalling. And I feel now that I've gotten older and I've been able to reflect on that, that it's most likely just my tendency to try to like always have something perfect. And if I didn't think I could get perfection, then I just stopped trying.
Yep.
And I just quit before I failed. And that was always such a like, it's for me, I look back on it and I think of it as like it was such a coping mechanism because I didn't want to run the risk of failure.
Yeah.
And, as I got older, I think this happened post college because after I finished college, I had a child, a young child, and then I was like trying to navigate being a mom and like I had no practice. Like I
Yeah.
didn't have an art practice. I had no space for an art practice. I had like no time. I was teaching and I had a young child and I was a single mom. So it
Yeah.
was like, how do I do this? And I had, because of my tendencies for perfection, I feel like I always go like all or nothing. It's like the
Yeah.
two ends of the spectrum. I either do it or I don't do it at all.
Yeah.
And I think that it took me a really long time. I started like thinking about like, I want to make, and I need to be more concerned with the process because the process is the part that's the most like rewarding for me. As I actually learned this from you, that idea of that flow state and like
Yes.
that point where you're making it, it's almost like meditation. And I really use my daily practice as like a meditation.
Mhm.
And it's just like a time to reflect. And I just think and like, make. And once I started to feel more about this idea, like that it didn't have to be about the product, but it was more about the process for me, I
Mhm.
was able to kind of let go a little bit and
Yeah.
not really be so concerned about what the end product was. So I was able to make more comfortably because I wasn't scared of the results.
Yes. Oh, beautifully said. And I know for sure that someone listened to that and like light bulbs went off because it was such a beautiful journey that you explained. And I think it's important. Like, I have a soft spot for perfectionists. I definitely feel like I'm a, what is it? A perfectionist in recovery is how I sort of spin
True.
that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like, so much of the advice, and I think it's good advice, it just gets condensed on like social media or, sometimes books and stuff. But it's like, don't worry about it. Just, focus on. But like, as a perfectionist, I always needed like tools to help me out of it. Like, I couldn't just tell myself, oh, just relax or don't think about it. Like, that was impossible. So I had to really put my energy into being like, okay, so, what can you focus on? I can focus on the process. And what ends up happening is you eventually kind of have like, you find peace with that part of you. Cause like, I don't think the perfectionist is inherently a bad thing. I think for a lot of people, it's just taste, it's coping mechanisms, it's all kinds of things that go into perfectionism. You may have needed it in your childhood, like
Yeah.
your safety may have come from that, and so you're a kid who you haven't developed a practice because most of us don't learn how to have a practice when we're young. And on the other hand, you've developed this great sense of understanding and intuiting what perfect looks like for your context. And so you
Mhm.
have this really strong muscle and this really weak muscle, and then you're thrown out in the world and you're like, I want to be an artist. And like, how do you remedy that? But I think the way you describe that of like, well, I'm going to put my energy into what I can control, which is process. And I think that's really beautiful. Do you have any tips? If someone is like nodding vigorously to this,
Mhm.
do you have any good tips for someone are struggling with that perfectionism, like how do you start to build a practice? Like what does that look like? And is there any like overlap with like what you tell your students? Because I think high school is such a fun age because you are on that precipice of like a little bit grown up, but definitely a little bit kid too.
Yeah. I would say that like some of the things that I think have been very helpful for me, and I don't know, my students really like embrace these because they are more product driven. And I wish that, I mean, I'm just thinking about those advanced kids that I have. I wish that they, had a sketchbook that they carried all the time and always worked in it. But I know that like they are struggling with time management and they are struggling with so much, which is my goes against all my philosophy and teaching and how like
Yeah.
we shouldn't have homework. And I have so
Yeah.
many feelings about that. But I do think that one of the biggest things that you can do is just like draw every day and allow, like, embrace mistakes, like welcome them, when like be okay with it and get a sketchbook and maybe don't even show anyone,
Yeah.
just to yourself, and draw a little bit every day. I always encourage like 5-10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a major like ambitious event. It
Mm.
can just be a little something, a little doodle while you're watching TV. And I think that doing it a little bit, it's going to, I mean, as with anything, any exercise, it's going to improve the way you approach it. And I think like even just like the muscle memory, like just the
Yeah.
movements, I mean, it's literally like a physical exercise too, drawing.
Yeah, and it kind of
I
gets you
think that,
outside of your body for a little bit. Like that's the flow state. It isn't always it's not always that easy. I mean, you're a daily
yeah,
painter, so you get it too. Like some days you show up and like an hour goes by and it feels like nothing, and other days you're
yeah,
like climbing a mountain and it's been like 5 minutes and you're like, what is
yeah,
time?
yes,
So it's
yeah.
definitely not always the most consistent thing, to be able to navigate that. And I'm curious more about teaching because like teaching is like a profession. It's also an identity, kind of in the same way that art, like an artist is, it's an identity and it can be a profession. So I'm curious, like, how you navigate both of those, like from everything from a time management point of view to also like how you identify yourself. I don't want to like lead you on too much with my question, but I know that for me, I've sensed this thing where the more I lean into teaching, sometimes it feels as though in some areas that pulls from my credibility as an artist, which is strange because I feel like the more I teach, the better I become an artist. But I'm curious your thoughts on balancing those.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that. And I do think that like just the I guess time demands can be a real struggle just because teaching is like, I mean, in a lot of cases, most people are spending a lot of their free time teaching, or most teachers are spending a lot of their free time teaching
Yeah.
and or doing activities that are part of your job as a
Mhm.
teacher. But I do think that, it took me a very long time. I always tell everyone, took me, I mean, this is my 21st year of teaching. I'm
Nice.
about to my
Congratulations.
year, thank you.
Yeah.
And it took me maybe like up until like 5 years ago to start to prioritize my own life and my
Mm.
own practice as an artist. So I had to really like separate my time. And I had to make it a point to say, like, I'm not going to work on weekends. I'm not going to work after school here. I'm going to do everything I have to do for my job. But I'm not going to do extra. And everything I do has to happen in that work day. And
Yeah.
that's so like nearly impossible. I know there's so many people on TikTok talking about how
Yeah.
we don't know how to do that. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I did it, but that helped me because I always say, like, my daughter was raised with the art club. Like, I was raising teenagers in the art club, and she was there running around as a toddler
Oh.
because we were every weekend working and we were doing things. And although I love that they know her, they're like, I can't believe your daughter's 22 now or whatever, right?
Wild.
And I mean, it's just so wild that they got to, have that experience. She had that experience, but
Yeah.
I also feel a little bit sad that like that's what we spent all our time doing.
Mm.
Like that is the challenge, I think, is like for me, the biggest challenge was time.
Yeah.
But you're so right, because when the time came to when I had time, like on the summers, I had
Yeah.
time to work, and it was hard to see myself as like an unofficial artist because I'm really a teacher.
Mm.
And I mean, even now, like I don't fully own that identity with like my students. My students don't know that I do anything online. Like I'm like a
Yeah.
like
The mystery
I'm a
persona.
boomer.
Yeah.
I don't have the internet. What's that?
Yeah. I'm
So
still using
they,
dial-up. It's fine. Yeah.
yes, I know. What is that? AOL. But it's like I have a big separation there, but it took me a really long time to start to make time for that. But I think that was like the best thing I could have done,
Yeah.
because like really starting to like lean into your identity as an artist, I think is, pivotal in making like those kind of like advancements, but in prioritizing your creative practice, in, investing in it. Like at that point, you start to think like, I am an artist. I should go to this training, or I
Yeah.
should go do this, or I will benefit from going to these museums and things like that. So I do think that like it's a very like challenging space to navigate if you're a teacher and you're trying to do that. But it's also almost like this, we sometimes have this feeling that we don't belong in that art world, and that can provide like more obstacles.
Yeah. And that's not, yeah. And that's the thing is, it's not like there's a lot out there that kind of reinforces that though. Like I feel like it's not just teachers being, insecure. There's a weirdly, and I like to say it's getting better again. It might just be like my corner of the internet. It's a little more forgiving and
Yeah.
flexible,
Yeah.
but it's, I can't tell. I'm curious what you think. Cause this is one of those when I'm doing the dishes and like pondering out the window, this is what I'm thinking of. But like, part of me thinks that a little bit of it is just like plain sexism. Caring professions tend to be gendered, and then I also think that like we have this trope of like this creative genius, and he's almost always a male and he's brooding. And the trade-off for the genius is like no social skills. And there's nothing more pro-social than teaching. Like even in the beginning, you were explaining like you had a great teacher who instilled in you these values and then you passed them on. I mean, what's more pro-social than like maintaining that? Like I could go on that forever, but that's so like enriching and beautiful. And like what's so strange about it is like, the more you sort of care and show up and give generously, it's like because you're going against that trope, like there's resistance there. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you feel
Yeah.
that? Is that just me?
Yes, absolutely. I feel like that is like the opposite of what is considered. And I think that's essentially the like basis for, misogyny in art,
Yeah.
the fact that women have always been outsiders and will probably, I mean, I don't know that will ever change. I feel like
Yeah.
we're not on a trajectory for that, but
Yeah.
I do see that. I mean, I do see that women, I mean, traditionally, I think there are probably more women in the education industry or
Yeah.
whatever field.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that there is some like truth to that. And I feel like that often makes people feel like they don't belong there. And so, one of the things that was really like helpful and really, I think helped change the way I thought about myself as an artist and an educator is like, I can't remember exactly what year this was, but it was a long time ago. It might have been like 2008 or something like that. I have that number in my head. But I was like, I applied to be part of this program, that they had a program that was specifically in Chicago, and it was about teachers in contemporary art. And
Mm.
I had never really like put those two things together. Like I, as a college student, I was majorly influenced by contemporary art. That was like what I was most inspired by. But then when I left college, I
Mm.
didn't have any sort of like connection to it anymore. I was a mother. I was really focused on other things.
Yeah.
But then
A
going
little
into
busy.
education, yeah, I really felt like I was totally gone. I was in another room. I was no longer there in that
Yeah.
shared space anymore. And so it became even harder to reconnect
Mm.
with that. But when I saw that program, it really helped me, because I thought, okay, I can navigate these two
Mhm.
fields. I can be an artist and I can be a teacher, and I could do them both. And I hadn't really saw myself in the art world anymore after like until that moment, I think.
Yeah, till 2008. Yeah, and I'm interested in like how do you think that they inform each other? Like more specifically, when you got to that point where you're like you had more boundaries with your work and then you were able to have more, depth in your art, your, official art practice. Once you made that separation, how do you feel like those things, your teaching profession and your art profession, how do they influence each other? Did you notice anything?
Yeah, actually, I think about that quite a bit, because I always think about how sometimes I want to draw inspiration from like my experiences as a teacher for my own work.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, absolutely. But I think it's more like it's this idea of like your life kind of plays into the things that you're experiencing. And I think about this all the time because I'm like, I'm, an art teacher. I teach high school. I teach kids on the border. There's so many like unique things that I'm experiencing that like would be hilarious in a book or like a
Yeah.
really thoughtful or like just things that are niche and not everybody gets a chance to experience these and they're so like important. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about art is like we emphasize or highlight and acknowledge the things that most people don't think are important enough to
Mhm.
even say. So, I think that I always think about that like, wow, this would make like a great painting series,
Yeah.
And I'm very often inspired by my job as a teacher and by my students. Like they inspire me so much. So I think that there is a very happy overlap that is like unique to somebody like a teacher who experiences so many different personalities and so many like even like one of the other things that I've always thought is like I didn't learn art as well
Mhm.
as when until I started teaching. When I
Yeah.
became a teacher, now I knew stuff I didn't even learn in college. So
Yeah. And a
I
lot of it's because
gave
students
me
have
that.
the best questions. Like,
Right.
and nothing teaches you there's no stupid questions like being in a classroom because someone will ask something, and you're like, oh, I know the answer. And then you start to think about it and you're like, wait a second, that's genius.
Yeah.
What is that?
Absolutely. And they will notice things that you might, and of course, just like I feel like being around younger people or like people who are new to art,
Yeah.
like they make observations that you glaze over. And that's the whole beauty of like art making is like this idea that we see things that other people might not,
Yeah.
and we acknowledge them and we like are interested in studying them. And I think that you learn so many interesting things from people who are new to the field or,
Mhm.
they come in with fresh eyes and
Yes.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And you said, you teach in Laredo, which is on the border, and Texas is a massive multicultural state. Sometimes we get like, people who don't know think Texas is just, gun-toting and white and Christian, and it's not. It's so incredibly diverse, like from Houston to El Paso. I'm curious, like, you're a teacher, you're in the community, plus you live there. Like, what is it like teaching in such a multicultural part of the state and the country? And like, does any of that carry into your artwork?
Yeah, I think there's so many really interesting things that happen as a result of that. Like one of the things that I always learn so much from my students about is like because we're on the border, we have this very bicultural
Mhm.
like experience and not just in the sense that like there's a lot of Latinos in our population, but it's more like there are people who are, driving one day from one country to the next and
Yeah.
experiencing two cultures that are similar but still quite different. Like
Mm.
there is quite a distinction from being in Laredo to like our sister city, which is Nuevo Laredo. And a lot of
Yeah.
people sometimes think it's the same city, but
Mm.
it's not. And there's such a distinction there. And I think that, I experience a lot of students and parents and community members who navigate these two worlds in a way that is unlike things you would see in like the Central Texas or
Yeah.
in East Texas or
Yeah.
in West Texas. I've never even been to West Texas, so I know like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
totally different.
Oh,
So
yeah,
like,
definitely.
there's experiences that you get to have, and there's learning experiences that you get to engage in when
Mhm.
you are teaching in, I would say, even any part of the world, because
Yeah.
there are just so many things that I would have never thought of, and then
Mhm.
I get to see it with my students. And the great thing about I feel like being a teacher is that it prevents you from being very like myopic about your view of the world.
Mhm.
Like you can't just see the way that you've always experienced. You are forced to put yourself in like the shoes of a lot of different experiences, things you never would have conceived of, because I have 30 students or I have
Yeah.
100 students and they're all experiencing different things that I never thought about. And I think that's wonderful. It's like so eye-opening and, ripe with inspiration.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think, an important part of being an artist is something I always think of like as flexibility, but for like creativity, for lack of a better word. And I feel like between teaching and being in a part of the country that's so multicultural, like you're really having to flex that like like you said, myopic. Like there's not one way to think about things. There's not one way to look at things. There's not one way to draw things. Like, and having that, I mean, like to me, there's nothing more enriching, as an artist, as a teacher, how those things intertwine. I think that's such a beautiful, combination of things. And I think the message, the takeaway from everything you just said, if curious of your thoughts, is that teaching and art, being an artist, are beautifully complementary to one another.
I agree. I think that they are. And it may have taken me a really long time to learn
Yeah.
that. But I do think that, I feel like I have gained so much from being a teacher
Mm.
that if I was doing something else, I don't know
Yeah.
what I would have gained from it. But I think that it has like driven my practice in a way that obviously it's like the only way that I know, but
Yeah.
I think that it has like driven my practice, and it's something that maybe has helped me get to a place where I feel like I have some time to do this and I have like a confidence that I can do this, because
Yeah.
that's, I think, oftentimes something that like is a major barrier for a lot of people.
Beautiful. Yes, I love that. And I want to pivot and talk more about you as an artist because I know those beautifully blend together. But you also have this like tremendously wonderful presence online. Like you are one of my people who like I get on and I look for your stuff. Like and maybe it's because I followed you for so long, but I love your journals, I love your challenges, I love seeing it inspire other people. You do live sometimes. You have Patreon, is that right? Also? Patreon group
Yeah.
sticker clubs. Your website is so wonderful. You give away free coloring sheets. Like I mean, it's so like to follow you is such a pleasure. Like, I really, truly hope everyone goes and follows you. But like, let me know more about like your strategy online. I'm sure it's not as thought out, but like, I mean, it isn't for me, but like how has this unfolded for you?
So I feel like I've had like an online presence for a really long time, and I haven't really done anything with it. Like, I mean, I still have, I think, like my very first photos there, and they're like my daughter eating watermelon. You know,
Oh, no,
so I
precious.
think like like I just used it for documentation, but then like over the years, I've really wanted to, use it as a way to be accountable. Right.
Yeah.
So that was always my thing. Like, I think in like 2015, I remember after a really long hiatus,
Yeah.
not working, I decided to start a daily painting practice.
Mm.
And so I started painting every day, and I was doing an oil painting a day,
Wow.
and I was posting it. And so that posting was really good for me
Mm.
because, again, as somebody who like, struggles with accountability, this was like helpful for me. And so that's always how I've used it. I've always used it as this like way to be accountable for my own practice. And somehow, like in, I guess maybe like last year, the year before, somehow my account started to kind of pick up like
Yeah.
momentum. And I started to get a lot of followers. And so I've really tried to like use it as a way to, I mean, essentially teach still,
Yeah.
because I think that a lot of the times my messaging is always about like having a practice and forgiving yourself for not always, coming to your practice or like
Mm.
always showing up. And that's always been like a big part of like why I make and why I show what I make, because I think that, I struggled for so long with finding a place where I felt like I could create. And also, I struggle always with those perfectionist tendencies and needed to like have a way to accept, the good and the bad, because they're both essential parts of that same coin.
Uh-huh.
So I try to always have like some sort of like a messaging that has to do with like teaching and forgiving yourself, and how great a practice is. And so I started with I think I started my Patreon, not, yeah, no, it was last year.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it was last year, the year before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The year before.
One of
And
those 20 year, you 20
I
20 years.
know
They're all a
everything
blur.
like squished together, but
Yeah.
that has been super rewarding because I feel like that's like essentially teaching for adults. So I get to like communicate with adults and talk to them about their practice and like provide opportunities and exercises that might help to inspire their practice. So
Yeah.
that has been such a blast to do. I really love that like platform. But yeah, essentially like I'm trying to grow mine a little bit more. I'm working on my YouTube channel, and you've been a big inspiration for that because I loved what you were doing. And
Oh, thank you.
but I think that one of the things that can be really challenging for a lot of us is
Mhm.
showing up like
Yeah.
on a platform, because you just kind of like it feels vulnerable.
Oh,
And
yes.
that was my biggest challenge. And I think like now that I've started to do it, like it's like no big deal anymore.
Yeah.
But Yeah, it's been like so rewarding. I think that I learned so much from everybody online, but also like can use it to help myself be accountable for everything.
Yes, I love that. And I'm so tremendous. I'm going to ride that compliment for like a week. I'm not even kidding. But I love how you show up and I love that you're always trying new things. And a theme that I've really sensed from you this whole interview, and it's something that reads through in your work too, but is like the word that keeps coming to mind is consistency. And I feel like consistency, like, I don't know, sometimes it loses context, but what I mean by it is like this willingness to show up. And I think that there's something so healing when you struggle with perfectionism of like, if you make something ugly, I will keep showing up. Like I will still keep having a space for you. There'll still be supplies for you. And I feel like you do that with your students, you've done that with yourself, and you do that with your online presence. And I just want to say like people can see it and it's so beautiful. And it really is like it's been so nice to talk with you. And I just want to hear your thoughts on consistency and then we'll let everyone know where they can find you.
Yes. So consistency is, I think, probably the game changer in the whole practice because by doing it, it's like you are making that space for that. And if I don't remain consistent, like I acknowledge that there will be things that get in the way. And
Mhm.
so I allow that to happen. But I think I read somewhere something they were like, try not to miss 2 days. Like if you can try
Mm.
not to miss 2 days, you're okay. But like I think that the consistency is going to be like the main thing because even when it's easy to get like, especially when you get discouraged by something you make, or like, boy, that was a real doozy yesterday.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I want to show up today for that. Like, consistency will help you to maintain that practice. And so for me, I found that I have to, make space for that. And sometimes if for me in this case, like it needs to be like 15 minutes because I know I'm very busy right now.
Yeah,
But I think 15 minutes is enough. Like just like
definitely.
carving that time. So, I mean, do what you can as much time as you have.
Yeah.
And I really kind of promote that, even if it's just a little bit,
Mhm.
just to kind of like stay consistent and keep working.
Yes, beautiful. Yeah, and I want to point out that you do, is it a 15 or a 20-minute challenge in your
I
notebook?
do, I do 15 minutes. Yeah.
15 minutes. I love that. Yes, I love seeing them. Also, I know it's practice. I'm old enough to know like that's what this is at this point, but I'm always so impressed by what you're able to accomplish in 15 minutes. It is such a delight to like follow you. And this has been such a fun conversation. I just try, I love connecting with you whenever we connect, but I want everyone to follow you to know where to support you, where to buy your work, your Patreon. If someone like, how do we find you?
So you can find me on Instagram and you can follow me. My handle or whatever it's called is
Mhm.
Erika Beeswax and it's Erica with a K. And you can find me on Patreon. I go by on Patreon and YouTube. I go by Flynn Craft House. That's the name of my like business, literally named for my house where I make crafts. I have Flynn Craft House on YouTube and Patreon. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to build my TikTok, but I don't know. I don't know.
I
I'm working
know.
on it.
It's a lot. Hey, I know that YouTube is now doing, or like TikTok and YouTube, you can both post, what is it, horizontal content now on both of them.
Oh, I know. I used it the other day. I was like, thank God.
Yes, I know. Make it easier for us because like I feel like I'm spinning
Yeah.
like 100 plates trying to keep up with social media. So
Yes,
take
that's
any break
exactly
I can
what.
get.
Mhm.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you again so much. It was a treasure. I know people are going to love this episode. So thank you for being here and take care.
Thank you so much. Hey, Sari.
Thank you so much for listening and thank you for being here. I wanted to also encourage you guys to leave a review. The feedback is incredibly helpful. And if you leave a review, I will read your handle or your name on the following week's episode. Take care, y'all, and happy creating.